Hello, I'm Rick. I'm the admin for this dog. This is my beautiful disguise I've got. And Umberto will be joining in a minute. It's going to let some people come into this room. So I'll just give a moment. So Umberto's going to be talking about the Throne of Lies from false Neros to would-be messiahs. And he's the host of So You Think You Can Rule Persia podcast. Unfortunately, I've forgotten what his favourite dumpling is already. He just told me. So, Umberto, when you come in, maybe you can tell people your favourite dumpling, as that's today's theme, along with deception. So let's see, we've got more people coming in. This is good. So the talk will be about 20 minutes long, and then after that, there'll be a Q&A session for about 20 minutes. So just put any questions you have in the chat, and then I can field them at the end. Please keep it family friendly if you can. Any technical issues, just ask and we will try and resolve them for you. We don't work for Zoom though, so we will do the best we can to help you. And I'm going to hand it over to Umberto to start now when he's ready.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me and everything is fine. Hi, I'm Umberto. My favorite dumplings are agnolotti. They're good. They're nice. It's very nationalistic and Italian of me to say that, but there we go. So, all right, let me share my presentation with you because we will be talking about a series of imposters throughout the history of pre-Islamic Iran, whether they're specifically Iranian, whether they're broadly in the environment. We'll have an idea. There's going to be false Neros, there's going to be messiahs. You can find out how that all works. So to start with, I'll start with a bit of a comic because this was originally meant to be a talk about Darius the Great, but then apparently great minds think alike. So Trevor also has a great session on Darius the Great. So I decided to just shift courses. But Darius is a very cool story. So I'll give you a brief overview of him at the very start, and then you can go more in depth in the next session if you're interested. So, all right. Where are we? What's the time? What's going on? So we are back in the old Achaemenid Empire, back in the 500s BC, where it's the empire of Cyrus and Cambyses. And in September of 522, a man called Darius killed the king called Bardia. Why did he do this, and how does he justify this to everyone else? Well, Darius claims that Bardia wasn't the real king after all. He claims that Bardia was killed several years ago by his mad brother and was later replaced by a court official, essentially, who was then masquerading as the king all along. And, well, Darius is doing the right and just thing by killing this imposter and restoring the empire to glory. Now, at the same time, Darius is telling us that he is also a member of the royal family. He's a distant cousin, but it's fine. So essentially, everybody knows that Darius is a descendant of this man called Achaemenes, from which the Achaemenid dynasty. But the suspicious thing is that the members of the current royal dynasty, this Bardia that was murdered, was descended from Cyrus, who himself claims as his furthest ancestor a man called Teispes. So what Darius is doing is he's saying, no, don't worry. I'm not descended from Teispes, but Teispes' dad was this Achaemenes that I'm actually descended from. So Darius tries to claim that he killed an imposter, and even if it was real, it's probably fine because he's still a royal, so we don't have to worry about it. Now, in the map, you see in red all the different regions that are listed by name as not believing Darius and bursting in rebellion. All the other ones might just be that they weren't listed by name and they just rebelled anyway. They were just part of the broader, the broader environment of the ones named. But in any case, Darius took 3 long years to reunify the empire after massacring everybody he could get his hands on. And then over here, we have an image of the base tomb inscription. So essentially, Darius is here to the left with his nice beard there. And in front of him are a bunch of all the kings that rebelled against him and that he has somehow humbled and eventually executed. So the fact is that once Darius has killed all his opponents, great. He is now the only legitimate person because there is nobody left alive to threaten him. And the interesting thing is that Darius's version of the story becomes essentially true, because even notable gossips like Herodotus don't tell us that, oh, Darius might have done something shady at this point. Herodotus buys Darius' story fully and says, no, this is what happened. This is actually, Darius was legitimate all along, and he did the right thing by killing this usurper. And we only found out that this is, not the real story later in history, when historians started to figure out that, wait, there are some things that don't add up. Cambyses wasn't actually as mad as he's depicted. How could you, have an imposter for this long without anyone noticing? So overall, Darius, successful imposter. But let's move a little bit further on to see about less successful imposters. So we're jumping about half a millennium forward in time, where in the 150s BC, the Seleucid Empire used to be the largest of the successor kingdoms of Alexander, and now essentially it's just been reduced to the map that you see here. There's like bits of Iran, but a lot of it is falling away. And the more concerning thing internally is that, well, there are two family lines fighting for the throne. Because essentially the Romans had some members of the royal family as their hostages, while others remained in the kingdom ruling. But the Roman hostages eventually managed to escape and then, try and make their claim valid over the whole Seleucid Empire. So now we have this essentially hostage line versus the, local line that are fighting each other over who is actually meant to be in charge. This is causing a bunch of chaos all around. So where's our imposter? Well, our imposter is a man called Alexander Balas, who claims to be the natural son of Antiochus IV, who was essentially the last strong king of the empire in a while. So it's a reasonable source for legitimacy, and he's also from the parallel line to the one that's currently governing the empire. But why is he an imposter? Well, it looks like he was probably just a random kid from Smyrna in Anatolia that kind of looked like the old king and had several powerful patrons from outside the empire. So in particular, Ptolemy V in Egypt supports Alexander and marries him to his daughter so that he can be tied into the family and better control what remains of the Seleucid Empire. So we're getting, unlike Darius, not an internal legitimacy through the nobility, for example, but an external legitimacy through the Ptolemaic kingdom actually supporting the army. Problem is that Alexander is not very good at his job, and the empire falls apart with the Parthians essentially sweeping through the east of the empire, taking Iran, taking Mesopotamia, and everything starts to collapse entirely. It's so bad that Alexander himself, despite his foreign support, is overthrown by the son of the man he overthrew in the first place. So again, we're jumping to another parallel line into the Seleucid Empire, and that man's going to try and fix things. He won't succeed, but hey, at least he gives it a shot. Next up, we have instead a different king. This is another Alexander, coincidentally, but a man called Alexander Zabanas. So we've essentially fast-forwarded time, like about 17 years. There's been 5 separate kings, or 5 separate successions in these 17 years. Civil war is destroying the kingdom. We need somebody to save us. Well, this Alexander Zabanas shows up and claims that he is the son of Alexander Balas, and as the son of the previous king, he should actually be the one in charge, not the line descended from this other man called Demetrius who was ruling. The problem is that, well, first of all, it's interesting that Alexander Zabanas claims to be the heir of a usurper, of an imposter at worst. So it's kind of strange that he tries to draw legitimacy from somebody who was not legitimate in the first place. But if you look at his iconography, his coins and everything, we can see that he's actually just using Balas as a through line so that he can go and claim legitimacy from Antiochus IV, again, when the empire was doing reasonably well. Wasn't great, but it was fine at least. The problem with Alexander Zabanas is that everybody realizes that he is an imposter. He essentially just shows up at the Egyptian court of Ptolemy the Eighth, and he is sent all the way into Syria to try and destabilize the empire, cause more civil wars, cause chaos, make sure that Egypt is going to be the only power in the area that is competent. If the kingdom of Syria breaks down, great for the Ptolemies. The problem is that what Ptolemy wasn't counting on is that Alexander Zabinas is actually reasonably good at his job. People like him. He tries to make effective reforms for the empire. But, he was meant to be an ineffectual puppet, so this doesn't work very well, at least for Ptolemy. So he sponsors a new separate civil war with another member of the family, which again destabilizes the empire. Alexander loses, and the Seleucid Empire is left to a slow and terrible decline. But all right, so now let's move forward again, another few centuries, and see about some Roman imposters that had something to do with the kingdom of Parthia. So, as you may or may not know, Nero died in July of 68 AD, and this ended up in a massive year for emperors, bunch of civil wars fighting for who gets to be in charge of the empire now. And the fact is that Nero is generally vilified and hated by the Senate and sources friendly to the Senate, but he was generally well loved by the common people because, he sang, he did theater, he was just a generally popular guy. And in the East especially, he had brought peace by essentially handing over the kingdom of Armenia to the Parthians and stopping the war that was going on there. So people are quite friendly to Nero. They like him. And so there arise some people around that want to take advantage of this appeal, of this Neromania. So essentially, there's a first pretender who is a singer and lyre player, like Nero himself was, and he shows up just about a year after Nero's official death. So he shows up in Greece and he says, "Hi, I'm actually Nero. I wasn't dead. I've escaped my captors, and now I'm here to take back the empire. Who's with me?" And apparently enough people are with him. He gathers an army of a bunch of deserters and common people who actually believed his story, believed that he was Nero. And he decided that he was going to take a ship and go all the way to Syria and the east of the empire to try and retake all of the empire and make himself emperor at last. Unfortunately, the weather did not agree that he was the legitimate Emperor Nero, because he was stranded on a little Greek island by a storm, and there he was faced with a bunch of loyalists of the new Emperor Vespasian, who ended up killing him and putting an end to this revolt. But we get two more imposters. There's a second one who appears in 80 or 81 in Asia Minor, who was also a skilled lyre player. So you can see that clearly the public perception of Nero is that his main deal is that he plays a lyre. Everything else is ancillary, we must assume. But the second pretender instead has a different strategy. He's in Asia Minor. He doesn't have to take a ship, so that's going to be helpful. But he manages to gather an army and march into Parthia, where he meets with a Parthian pretender called Artabanus. And together they sort of decide what's going to happen, how can they make the most of this false Nero's position. And they plan a march on Rome, or according to certain sources, they try to actually invade Roman territory. But we hear nothing more of it, also because Artabanus himself, being a usurper or a pretender, really, in the Parthian throne, is eventually overthrown himself. So that's gone. Instead, we get a third pretender. That's a few years later in 8089. And we don't know much about him. We just know that he's an extra one. He also exists there. And so he travels also to Parthia. He is hosted by the Parthian king Pacorus II. And there are maybe some moves that are made to, make use of this leverage against the Romans. But in the end, after the Roman emperor at the time made threats of war, this false Nero was just sent back into Roman territory to presumably meet a gruesome fate. So, all right, that is what we have for the time of the Parthians. But we must move on another half a millennium into the age of the Sassanid Empire. So there's a new dynasty in Iran. They're the Sassanids, and they're a lot more powerful, a lot more dynamic than the Parthians. And they have a lot of conflicts with Rome in the west and with the nomads in the east, northeast. And by the time we're in 590, when our story begins, these in the east are mostly the Turks. So what happens? Why is the 590s a crucial period? Because Sassanid kings for the last 2 or 3 generations have been trying to reduce the power of the nobles. The nobles have always been a thorn in the side of the nobility, So of the monarchy. So they're trying to reduce this power, be more of a centralized state. And this is all very well and good, but the problem is that a lot of these reforms turn the Sassanid army away from a more feudal entity, let's call it, into something more unified that is under the command of generals appointed by the king. Problem is that, like the Romans know, generals who lead armies for long periods of time tend to gain their loyalty. And when the army is more loyal to the general than the king, problems happen. So what we have here in this image is, to the left on horseback is a man called Bahram Chobin. He is a high noble who is in charge of the army on the steppe. And he has recently become a hero in 590 by killing the Khagan of the Turks here on the yellow horse in the right in personal combat just by shooting him with an arrow. So great, Bahram Chobin is doing brilliantly. He is a hero now. But this threatens the authority of the king, Hormizd IV, who decides that he's going to try and demote Bahram to get him out of the way, but he eventually gets overthrown because, well, Bahram has an army and Hormizd doesn't, so who's going to win? Okay, but now Bahram is at the head of the Sassanid Empire, but, how does he claim legitimacy? He has no legal legitimacy. Why? How does he say that he does? Well, first of all, he claims it as a descendant of the Parthian Empire. He's saying that as a Parthian noble, for centuries back, I've actually had this legitimacy. I'm descended from the Arsacid kings, and Sasan, the founder of the Sassanid dynasty, was just a lowly shepherd, and he didn't have the right to rule in the first place, so we might as well just abandon him. But on top of that, Bahram decides to use a millenary prophecy because the Sassanids used the dates of the Seleucid era, which starts in 312 BC, and by this time we're getting close to the millennium. And there was a prophecy going around that a non-Sassanid savior would defeat the nomads, defeat the Turks, and then start a new empire that would rule for 1,000 years. So Bahram is claiming he is the prophesied Messiah and he will bring a new age to the empire. The problem is that the nobles of the empire had supported Bahram by saying, well, he's a fellow noble. He'll clearly reinstate our rights and clearly reinstate our privileges. But now that he's upending everything and is, might even be more centralizing as a Messiah king, they all decide to side with Assassinidate or Khosrow II. So in the end, with with Roman help, Bahram is overthrown and forced into exile. Among the Turks, interestingly enough, despite having killed their king, he's well accepted there. And the problem is that his legend still perseveres. He still has loyalists around, so he's eventually murdered by agents of Khosrow II. But it's interesting that his legacy still continues long enough that he has an epic poem written about himself. And also, the Samanid dynasty from medieval Iran will later claim their legitimacy from him, of all people. And for our last imposter, we move again into Roman lands, and it's only about a decade after what happened with Bahram Chobin. So I mentioned before, Khosrow II, this legitimate heir of the Sassanid Empire, is restored to the throne with the help of the Roman Emperor Maurice. So that's brilliant. He is now in charge again. But then his benefactor, Maurice, is overthrown by a man called Phocas, who then takes the throne and supposedly murders all of Maurice's family. But shortly after, there's a knock at the door of the palace, and a man claiming to be Maurice's son, Theodosius, appears at court and is taken in by Khosrow. Khosrow receives an appeal from this Theodosius, who says, hey, listen, my father put you on the throne when you were in trouble, put me on the throne now that I'm in trouble. And Khosrow agrees. He decides, you know what, let's start this total war against Rome. So essentially, as you can see here in hatched, the territory that Khosrow managed to take over from the Romans, and here in the squiggly line are the original borders of the Sassanid Empire. And essentially, we can see that with the recognition of Theodosius, the Sassanid army manages to march into several places, especially the crucial border forts, just by showing Theodosius and saying, hey, your legitimate emperor is here, let him in, and the army extends, and the empire grows and grows. And we're also kind of unclear, is Theodosius real, or is he just a pretext that Khosrow has made and he's found something that looks close enough that it'll be fine? So that's one question. But the fact is that eventually the new Roman Emperor Heraclius tries to negotiate with Khosrow, but Khosrow says, hey, listen, you're not a legitimate Roman emperor. I have the Roman emperor here. His name is Theodosius. He's my friend. I'll just have him rule with me, and that's all I negotiate with. But then eventually things get so bad for the Romans that the Roman Senate petitions Khosrow for peace. The Roman Senate goes up to him and says, you know what, we give up. Whatever. You can have anything you want. You can choose the Roman emperor. We give up. But despite all of what you would expect, Khosrow decides that no, he doesn't want, surrender is too good for the Romans. He wants them to be utterly destroyed. He wants to annihilate them and stop Rome from existing. But then the natural question is, what happened to Theodosius? What happened? So one of the options is that he just died of natural causes during the early war, and so that didn't, he had gotten to this point, so he might as well continue. It's a shame Theodosius is dead, but we can do what we can. Otherwise, Theodosius just met with a little accident. Khosrow decided to get rid of him because, well, if with Constantinople in sight, he might as well take it for himself. And the last option is that there never really was a Theodosius. It was always, maybe some sort of farm boy that kind of looked Roman enough for the role that Khosrow took on, and he, as soon as he was no longer necessary, just disappeared into history. So what have we learned from all this time of imposters? Well, we've learned that imposters are rarely successful, and generally they have external forces trying to support them, but the problem is that if you're supported from the outside, you can be gotten rid of just as easily from the outside, and especially you have nothing to stand on within your empire. Another problem with this is that there are often legitimate heirs hanging around in wait to reclaim the throne that is rightfully theirs. The most successful usurpers, or imposters, Darius and Bahram, generally have some sort of internal support with the nobles, and they have a broad appeal that essentially allows them to have longer-lasting legitimacy. But why is Darius the most successful of all? Why does he succeed where Bahram fails? Well, because he had the capacity and the skill to just eliminate everybody who could have been a threat. Bahram left Khosrow II alive. He wasn't able to catch him, but since Darius managed to kill all the members of the previous royal family, he is the one that succeeds. So we've learned, after all, that being an imposter does pay as long as there's nobody left to challenge you. So there we go. That was my talk, and I'm happy to listen to anybody's questions.
Yeah, thank you, Humberto. That was really good. We've got some questions, so let me just get the chat open and see. So, Christoph, you've got your hand up. Do you have a question? I can allow you to talk, or you can type it in the chat. Oh, your hand's just gone down. Okay. Okay, misclick, don't worry. Trevor, you've got some, so let me find you on the list, and I can allow you to ask your questions if you like. So if you unmute your microphone, Trevor, you'll be able to talk and ask the questions directly if you prefer.
Right, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
I can hear you.
Excellent. So going through it, how much local support did Alexander Balas and the hostage Seleucids have inside the empire? Because it's great to have Rome, but
yeah, I mean, generally the only way they tend to gain the throne is because they're contending with either a child or somebody vastly incompetent. So that is usually the way they get internal legitimacy. But then they also fail miserably. So that also leads to a cycle. So the Seleucids didn't really have that massive nobility overall. So the idea is that it wasn't as important as, say, the Sassanids, but they did have some internal support, mostly because you're not the other guy, I think, is the assumption. So it's like a least of two evils sort of argument.
That makes sense. Barring anybody else having questions, I also had why were there no Parthian dynastic pretenders? All of your examples from the Parthian period were Romans.
Yes. So yeah, I didn't really put any pretenders because there weren't any that were pretending to be someone else, but there are so many Parthian dynastic pretenders. I think the problem with, I'd call it a problem with the Parthian, essentially tribal nobility expanded onto an empire and having more of an elective monarchy. The problem there is that basically everybody can be a dynastic pretender, and there are so many all around. And yeah, there's definitely, I haven't counted it, but I would believe that there's more civil wars in the Parthian period than all the others put together. But yeah, it's essentially just a mess. And there were probably due to lack of sources, there were no pretenders who claimed to be someone else. At least not that I could find.
That makes sense for a dynasty that relies a lot on numismatics.
Yes.
And my last question was, why must the Seleucids make me so sad?
I mean, I think they try. I think the problem is that like they give it a shot, but then eventually it's really quite pathetic. Like the last century is just them fighting for like 2 cities in a row that they have left in the empire, and then there's like 15 what is there? There's like a 5-way civil war at the end over like 5 cities. Everybody has one headquarters, and that's how they keep going until the Romans say, well, this is getting silly. We should just get rid of them all. Let's just annex Syria into the empire.
Makes sense to me. I just don't want to write about it.
Yeah, it's a sad time. But hey, that's why we managed to just jump off that ship after they lost control of Iran, and it was fine.
Okay,
now go on.
Oh, sorry. Carry on, Trevor. Sorry.
No, I was just say, and go on, everyone. I know there's other people in here.
I see a number of people. It's more than 2, so that's good. Feel free to ask questions. Any questions are good. I'm happy to answer any of them.
So let's give people a chance to ask some questions. Well, one thing I was wondering with the false Neros, where they can play a liar. So
yeah, I mean that seems to be the main thing that everybody has in common. For some reason, that's what everybody's happy with.
Yeah, but it makes me think about how, I know, maybe easy it was to have somebody pretend to be Nero, because you're not going to have good imagery of people there. It's not like today where everybody's seen photographs of leaders or celebrities or anybody. So how easy do you think it would be for somebody to be put as a particular figure and then suggested to be Nero?
I mean, I think it's sort of interesting because at the time you would have had like coins. If you're a provincial, you just have a coin that's vaguely, you have a vague idea what Nero looks like, but how close is the coin to reality? You could just say, oh, it's just, they just got my good side on that coin. The other side is actually what I look like. So yeah, I think it was probably reasonably easy. You just need to have, I assume, that sort of cult leader like charisma where you can actually convince everybody that despite everything you're seeing, despite the fact that everybody's announced he's dead and there's a new emperor in charge and this is a forlorn hope, no, trust me, I'm actually Nero. And it looks like it's also a period where a lot of people are claiming to be things that they aren't, because there's also a bunch of bizarre cults and con men in this area of Anatolia trying to play off people saying, oh, I don't know, if he says he's the emperor, he might as well be. He speaks fancy, so I suppose he plays a liar. I can't. So who am I to say he isn't?
Yeah, just being extremely confident in who you are. Definitely. So. We have another question here from Alan, who asks, how important was family succession compared to military ability, etc.? Did it change over time?
So generally, it definitely did change over time based on the period. So I would say, definitely during the Achaemenid and Seleucid period, I would say mostly, family succession was essentially key, because it was mostly my father was king and thus I am king, or my brother was king and thus I am king. Military ability comes in strongly there, mainly when essentially it's a civil war, you're usurping, you're trying to take power from these people. Instead, for Parthia and the Sassanids, they both have this sort of more electoral system for monarchy, which essentially makes it a bit more important to actually be competent on the throne. So the idea is that for Parthia, generally, it was literally an elected position. So it helped if you were descended from the king, but you could also just be a long lost cousin who managed to win a great victory and say, okay, cool, you're in charge now. Great, good luck. The Sassanids, again, go a bit back more to this dynastic point of view, but the idea is that generally it's not exactly equal, but the fact is that as long as you are a son of the king, you and your brothers are almost equally valid. And so it depends on how much can you convince people that you're actually capable, how much experience do you have under your belt. And usually, for example, for Sassanid kings, they tended to have a little vassal kingdom to rule as princes. So they essentially had practice in rulership. And so, the nobles generally who get to make these choices could say, oh, well, I see Narse has been able to defend against the Romans in Armenia. He's expanded the empire. I think Narse would be a good king. Let's focus on him over his brother Bahram, or as other cases as they may be.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions? Anybody? If you put them in the chat. And whilst people are thinking, do you think there'd be any cases where somebody successfully came to power and would have then written out the alternative or the correct history, and they would have replaced it with an alternative history saying they were legitimate when in fact they weren't?
Yes, I mean that's a key example with Darius. He basically he essentially he was so convincing that for centuries afterwards nobody doubted that he was the legitimate king, because in the story of to expand a bit on the story of Darius, the fact is that he claims that his predecessor but one, Cambyses, was actually a mad king who was destroying and wantonly killing people and marrying his sisters, and actually that wasn't fine at the time, so he had to change everything. And then eventually he just says that Bardia was a random usurper. But the fact is that if we look at the historical record, it looks like, there is no evidence, if there were a usurper who's an imposter, then people clearly would have understood this. But essentially, Bardia doesn't look like he is a usurper. He's not, giving massive tax cuts to everybody or trying to bribe the nobility away to ensure that they're his friends. He is just continuing business as usual, and then he just finds himself murdered because, well, Darius managed to convince a group of powerful nobles that he could, and he wrote a massive decree that he was right all along on a mountain, and that worked out well enough for everyone else.
Yeah, and if they're showing they're competent enough, then
exactly.
The right people.
Yeah, exactly. And Darius manages to, as I said, he basically reconquers the empire from the ground up. It takes him 3 years. Yeah. And then he becomes one of the greatest kings Rod has ever seen. So, okay, fair enough. Even if he's a usurper, it'll do, I suppose. And then he also marries, I think, the sister of the king that he murders, just so, as insurance, his sons and his heirs are still going to be part of the previous dynasty, just through a maternal line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some legitimacy there, and the neighbors, whoever, they probably enjoy that there is some stability there as well.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay, any more questions from anybody here? I see Trevor's just in the chats that if you want even more information about Darius, tune in
yes.
for the History of Persia panel in the next session. Which, just a note on that, actually, with some of the technical issues we've had today, the panels are, there should be a link in the lobby which will take you to the panels. They're not in the regular lobby here for the individual sessions. So you can, or just ask in the lobby, and we'll be able to send you a link so you'll be able to jump across there. So it's a little bit confusing, I'm afraid. Alan says, thanks for the interesting response. It seems to have similarities with Byzantium. Though they have a role for popular appeal with Constantinople. Support for the church and the bureaucracy was also important.
Yeah, very much. I think there are definitely similarities with Byzantium. I find that, yeah, the Byzantine succession is generally similar to the Parthians, I would imagine, at least from what I know of it. But except the difference is that in Byzantium, the dynasty isn't important, while in Parthia, you should be part of the main dynasty. Doesn't matter how distantly related you are, but you need to be part of that same umbrella, because I think it's more strongly noble. So there are six key noble clans, and all of these are essentially jockeying for power. So everybody's making it so that only the royal family can achieve royal status, while the others are just working around it in the shadows. And yeah, you also mentioned support of the church and bureaucracy. That's also very true. Support of the church is extremely important. Like in the Sassanid period, mostly in the Sassanid period, because for example, we have a king called Yazdegerd I in about the early 400s. And he really antagonizes the church by trying to be really friendly with Christians. People are worried he might pull a Constantine and convert. So in the end, he is murdered because of his religious views. And then he is replaced with a more pliable king. And then when he tries to be a bit more independent from the church, he is also murdered. And the chain goes on for about 100 years until, again, we get that series of strong kings I mentioned before that try to reform the empire. So things are more reliable, and if I have a son, he will succeed me and he will live a natural lifespan, and that will be fine.
Right. Let's see. There's no more questions in the chat at the moment. So is there anything else that you want to add, or any other thoughts that you've had?
Yeah, just tune into the podcast if you haven't listened to it before. Khosrow II is out tomorrow. You get to hear more about the story of Theodosius and everything. So get to find out more in detail on that. If you'd like an hour and a half or so of those 2 slides, you can have all the necessary detail, which is, a great time. We've enjoyed it. And yeah, we're slowly heading towards the end of the podcast, but that'll be a fun time. It's been enjoying the ride so far. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of Intelligent Speech. There's a bunch of exciting panels that you can attend, and also if you find that 2 are contemporaneous, you can just watch the recording later on, and you don't have to miss anything. So yeah, just hope you enjoy that. I think I'll be on a panel right now after this, and then one after that. So it's a busy time.
Yeah, really busy day for you.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left, so if anybody's got any questions or anything they want to add, please type it now, and we'll see. So do you have plans for another podcast after you finish this one?
Well, we're sort of working on it as a secret plan, essentially, but the hope would be, and it always was from the start, but now we have to decide, are we willing to continue until 2030? But the idea would be to eventually do Islamic Iran. We've done pre-Islamic. Let's just go all the way to 1979 when the monarchy was abolished. And then, we have, 2,600 years of Iranian history all in one long list of kings with dubious legitimacy that just decided by me. But that'll be exciting. There's caliphates, there's Mongols, there's the modern age, the British East India Company comes into it. So
yes,
there's a whole lot of history to cover.
Oh, I've got a question here. Let's see. Will sources and languages you can read be an issue in later periods?
Probably. So I've started having a bit of a look. Mostly the main sources are in Arabic or Persian, mostly Arabic for now. And those, they're readily translated. Otherwise, it's mostly me asking people I know for help if they can please help me translate some Arabic because I need it. But it's a long enough time. I could probably just learn Arabic at this point, but it sounds like a long extra project to go through. But so yeah, I'm going to miss the comfort of Latin and Greek, which I could actually read. But no, the rest we'll figure something out, and hopefully there's enough non English language, or at least European language scholarship, that I can sort of pick up the little bits that I'm missing otherwise.
Yeah, and I guess it's important, the sources there, because if you've had something that's been translated, particularly if it's come into, you might get some different opinions put into the text.
Oh, exactly. Yes.
Yeah,
there's something about, there's certain sentences in the early caliphates where, depending on how you interpret a certain word, that could mean that somebody is either designated as heir or is just called a good friend, and so that causes no end of dispute, even to this day, to people who speak the language. So, for me, I just need to try and read other people's scholarship and hope that it's clear enough, and try to at least provide the options and say, hey,
yes, yeah,
this is as far as I got. Make up your own minds and see what works for you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. We're at time now, and I'm going to let you hop across to your next session. So yeah, thank you very much. That was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
bye.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, I'm going to end the session now, so everybody can hop across back to the lobby and find your next thing to listen to.